Mr. President, on January 4th, 2012, President Obama bypassed the Senate's constitutional right to advise and consent to nominees and instead unilaterally made appointments to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and to the National Labor Relations Board. He purported to do so under the Constitution's recess appointment clause, even though at the time of the appointments, the Senate was holding pro forma sessions roughly every 72 hours. If allowed to stand, President Obama's unprecedented and unconstitutional recess appointments could result in presidents of both parties routinely circumventing the Senate's advice and consent function, and thus depriving the people and the people's representatives of an essential check on the executive branch. President Obama's actions also violate the Constitution's fundamental system of separation of powers. He has inserted the unilateral power to override Congress's own determination of when it's in session and when it's in recess. At an absolute minimum, the Senate's institutional prerogatives demand that we be allowed to make our own rules, and yet President Obama's actions would deprive our body of even that basic right. In the past, I've given pretty broad deference to the President's judicial nominees, both in the Judiciary Committee and on the floor of the United States Senate. I've voted in favor of the vast majority of President Obama's nominees, including many with whom I have fundamental disagreements on various points. But I can do so no more. The founders expected that each branch of the federal government would exercise the necessary constitutional means to resist any encroachments by the other branches. Among those constitutional means is the Senate's advice and consent function, which I exercise today by voting against a nominee that otherwise might have received my support. 33 other senators did exactly the same. The President cannot expect the Senate's full cooperation at the same time that he does violence to this body's constitutional prerogatives. The threshold for confirming President Obama's nominees must change accordingly. Simply put, there is a new standard for confirmations as a result of the President's own actions. I find this unfortunate, but ultimately necessary. Both today and in coming days, I will join with other senators to act as a check and a balance on the President's unconstitutional conduct by voting against some nominees. I expect that many of my Republican colleagues, and in time, some of our Democratic counterparts, will rise in defense of the Constitution and vote against President Obama's nominees until such time that he takes actions to restore the Senate's full constitutional right to advise and consent to his nominations. Mr. President, I now choose to turn to another topic, a topic that's important to many Americans, a topic that relates to an important anniversary that we're recognizing. Today we're highlighting the third anniversary of President Obama's failed stimulus package. The President promised 3 years ago that the stimulus would create what he characterized as millions of jobs. But today, unfortunately, devastatingly, there are nearly 13 million people in America who are still unemployed. And many millions more have even given up on looking for jobs. 3 years ago, the White House said that because of the stimulus package, unemployment would not exceed 8%. That hasn't happened. In fact, the unemployment rate has topped 8% for 36 straight months now, the longest stretch of high unemployment since the Great Depression. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that it's going to go even longer. We won't see sub 8% employment, according to the CBO, until 2014. The President sold his stimulus package to the American people by claiming that he would make immediate investments in what he characterized as shovel-ready jobs. But last June, the President acknowledged that shovel-ready was not as shovel-ready as we expected. Nevertheless, a lot of money has been spent as we've been waiting for these jobs to materialize, jobs that never quite came about. In fact, some of it was spent in ways that have nothing to do with stimulating the economy. For example, Consider some of the ways in which this stimulus money has been spent. $760,000 was spent on interactive dance software. $1.2 million was spent on a train museum. $2 million was spent to study ant behavior. $762,000 was spent to study improvised music. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure it's lovely, not necessarily deserving of scarce federal resources. $300,000 to track weather on other planets. Great if you live on another planet, not so great if you live here on Earth, in a country that has accumulated an unprecedented debt exceeding $15 trillion. $153,000 for an indoor water park. $712,000 to develop, quote, a machine-generated humor system. In other words, a joke machine. Mr. President, this big joke is on the American taxpayer. Unfortunately, it's no laughing matter. In the last 3 years, we've added more than $4 trillion to the national debt. We've recorded the 3 largest annual deficits in our nation's history, and we're on pace for a 4th straight deficit exceeding $1 trillion. This week, the President submitted a budget that calls for adding $11 trillion in new debt over the next decade. His own Treasury Secretary calls the level of spending unsustainable, and it is. And despite the overwhelming evidence that his stimulus package has failed, the President has called for additional increases in spending. I know the President is a good man. I also know that he faced a difficult economy when he took office. But the President is unwilling to tell the truth to the American people about what lies ahead, about some of the challenges that we face. And I think he needs to do so, and he needs to acknowledge the fact that this stimulus package has failed so that we can avoid making similar mistakes in the future. Today, we cannot celebrate the anniversary of the President's stimulus. Rather, we must lament a tremendous lost opportunity by this administration to put this country back on the right track over these last 3 years. For the sake of future generations, I hope it is not too late to change course. Thank you.